Hey everyone, welcome to episode 34 of Business Therapy, a show about helping real professionals solve real business problems. Every week, we invite a guest onto the show to help guide them through the normal pains and setbacks of working through their career. Using a mindfulness-first approach, we help our guests find conscious solutions and help give them the tools to take on challenges that inevitably pop up during that regular ebbs and flow of business. I'm Sam Joshak, and as always, I'm here with Jonathan Adams. Today on the show, we have Eric Gonzalez. Hey, Eric.
Hey, Sam.
Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself, your business, and how we can help you today?
Awesome. Well, first, thank you guys for having me on. Like you said, my name is Eric Gonzalez. I'm head of business operations at NurseWallet. NurseWallet is a mobile app that helps nurses make and manage their money. And so the reason I wanted to come on the show today was I'm a pretty new professional. I'm a year out of college, and I want to know how you guys would recommend dealing with self-doubt in new situations as a new professional.
That's a great question, and I'm sure very common to everyone. Not even just to new professionals, but to anyone who's ever been given a new assignment. So it could even be a customer asks you for something or asked you before. So it's always that initial request where you have some doubt. Can you give us an example of how it presents itself, Eric?
Yeah. I would say, so NurseWallet's a new company. We're a young startup, and a lot of the situations I've been put in are new to me, new to the company. So there's not an existing roadmap. One thing that comes to mind is recently I've been working with content creators about creating nurse education content that's related to our app and their own personal brands. And in these interactions, I'm pitching ideas related to like content strategy and things that I think we should do. And this is new for me. I feel confident in my ability to make the decision. And I think my ideas are good, but pitching these ideas to outside parties is definitely new.
And what's your role relative to theirs? I just want to make sure I understand. They're providers. They're what's the relationship?
Yeah, so I'm providing more like strategic insight and some ideas to that they could start with when creating Instagram and TikTok content.
But the content providers are people that you're hiring, people that
people we're partnering with they're producing the content or they're creating the content. I'm just helping with logistics and providing some ideas.
Sorry, but how come they're producing the content?
Because I'm not a nurse. It's nurse specific content.
Got it. So they're users of the platform.
Yeah.
And you're giving them ideas on them producing content.
Correct.
Okay. So they're a customer of NurseWallet.
Some of them, yes.
Got it. Okay. So I just want to understand, a lot of times the greater the perceived disparity in the power between the person that's asking you to do something or to whom you're presenting, the greater that tension can sometimes feel. So in this case, it's interesting. You're feeling it, and there's a relatively equal relationship. It sounds like.
Yeah, I would say so.
And to piggyback off that, then can you pinpoint where in these conversations, as an example, some of the discomfort is coming from? Is it, like you said, the time when you're pitching something that you just personally don't have experience with? I mean, when do these thoughts and feelings of lack of experience or lack of confidence or self-doubt pop up? And what does it feel like when they do pop up?
Yeah, it's definitely with things that I don't have a ton of experience with, or that's something kind of on the fringe of what I'm comfortable. And I guess when they do pop up, it results in me needing to over explain or over justify when questions don't even arise. Yeah. Is that clear?
Yeah, that makes sense. So let me ask you this, just to juxtapose right now. And you're saying you're new in your career generally, but are there any professional tasks or situations that you go into feeling confident and this self-doubt doesn't kind of pop up? And if so, explain that kind of situation, what that feels like.
Yeah, I'd say there's some parts of my role, or some parts of things that I do that I feel very almost in flow. It's very quick. Like I'm confident in what I'm doing. A lot of that involves like growth marketing and like copywriting, content writing. I'm pretty confident in. Um,
Why?
and I guess I've done it a lot before. I enjoy doing it, and it comes to me pretty quickly. So I guess this also is a bit of me juggling, like I know I feel good. I'm confident in my ability to do that, but I also want to push my boundaries and grow. And so that I know the discomfort that I'm feeling is sometimes warranted and necessary for me to grow a bit. Um, I guess a lot of what I'm experiencing is me from wanting to push myself, and then also experiencing like the self-doubt and like questioning that comes along with challenging yourself in general.
And why do you think you should be an expert in this area? Like, why do you think in the ones that you've done before versus versus pushing them on content creation that you feel there's a gap or something you're missing?
I don't think you need to be an expert. I think it's just something that needs to get done. And I mean, we're a pretty small, scrappy team. So it's just about like me doing what needs to get done.
I guess that's what I was getting at. Do you think there's a perception or expectation from other people with whom you're engaging that you should know this area?
Honestly, probably not. So it might just be self-created. I think that might be what you're getting to. But yeah, probably not.
Well, that's usually my experience. Especially you said you're new to the workforce. So I don't know that people necessarily expect this breadth of expertise or experience, in what you're doing. So I was just noting that.
Yeah, and it's a good point to bring up that there's two parts here. There's an external, a perceived or real external pressure that we're talking about now, which is, okay, does this person expect me to behave a certain way, or is there some requirement that I have a certain level of skills or affluence in a particular topic or subject area, and am I violating that when I go into the exchange with the person? And it sounds like in this case we don't know, or you said, oh, it's probably not even there. So that's one thing to juggle, which is if the person that you're interacting with has no expectation of you, then that should be something you can work through logically and try to start practicing dismissing, okay, well, I shouldn't have doubt if there's no expectation, because what am I violating? But then there's another component, which is the internal component. And we can talk about, I'd like to switch over to that in a minute, which is just totally self-generated from you. But it sounds, I guess, and maybe this is repetitive from what Jonathan just went over with you, but if there's no, do you feel like if you could kind of confirm to yourself there's no expectation about your skill level experience from the other party, that would help, or it would still be coming more from you internally?
Yeah, that definitely does help. I think a bit of it is definitely internal. Like I definitely want to push. I definitely of the mindset of like wanting to push myself to see what else I could do, and like see what I like to do and see how far I can go. Just because why not? So a lot of it might be just self-imposed.
How did you come to be in that position that you're working with these nurses? Did someone ask you to do this? Is it a natural part of your role?
It's a natural part of my role. A lot of what I do is marketing related, and thus far, a lot of our marketing efforts are related to creating content with nurses, with our users, and with the nurses that we partner with. So it's become just kind of a natural part of the role.
Was someone doing it before you?
Not really. We have some other people on the team that help out, but I've slowly kind of taken the reins.
Well, and that's where you talk about it's new role. There's not a lot of expectations. And I do think it's important to go back to your comment about, well, you like to push yourself. and you like to push yourself into the edges of what you know into different situations, I would encourage you not to conflate this idea that there's always going to be discomfort if I push myself to the edge of what I know, because that, in my opinion, is not where the discomfort is coming from. It's back to the expectation piece, but we'll talk about expectation. We were starting to talk about expectations externally, but like you said, it's sort of, I think, more your expectations for you internally, like that you're generating your own expectations, or how much expertise you should have, or how much expertise one would demonstrate if they were to be competent in a thing. And that's all coming from you. And I guess in relating them, that could be a reflection of what you think other people would think. So like you said, if you can dismiss that, then that's one piece of it. But then really you need to turn inward and say, do you believe that you should have a certain level of expertise before you are allowing yourself to become confident at a thing? Because if you go into every interaction like, well, this is a good thing, I should be uncomfortable because I'm not really that familiar with this. But then you always pair that with this discomfort, lack of confidence. That's going to be a bad pairing, and it's going to be hard for you because you're going to constantly be struggling with, well, I should always be pushing my edges and exploring new capabilities or new experiences. But then you're starting to build this, I think, narrative but that always means it's going to be coupled with discomfort because I don't have a requisite level of expertise to be comfortable. And I think we should challenge that assumption.
Anybody here?
Can you explain a little bit more on that? Or
yeah, for sure. What parts of it do you think
the coupling part
could help you, I guess, illuminate a little bit more? Yeah. So what I'm trying to explain is, if there's a part of when we're listening to you and I hear you saying, okay, I don't have a lot of expertise in this area, but it's a good thing and I should be a little uncomfortable. But you're coupling that as a good thing, so you know you're going to keep doing it, with this idea that it itself should be uncomfortable and cause doubt and cause a lack of confidence because you consider it to be an area where you don't have a lot of expertise. And I'm saying that assumption can be challenged. It's easy to be confident and not have doubt and be doing something new.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's a good point. I guess I was just, I can think of like scenarios now where I'm doing something new, but I feel confident doing it. But then there's some scenarios where I'm questioning a bit more than I would normally.
And why? Like, can you think of why as you're reflecting right now?
I'm not totally sure. Maybe it's I'm honestly not totally sure. I guess it's sort of situational. Maybe it has to do with like, it might be a new situation, but the core skills required are something that I'm pretty comfortable with. I would say that's probably the root of it.
So let me ask you this, because like you're starting to tease apart, okay, well, sometimes I feel like there's core skills that translate between things that are maybe more novel. And then you're building, again, that story of, well, in those cases, I'm more comfortable because I have enough experience. So therefore, that allows you to be comfortable. What I would say, at least, and let me relate to myself and my own experience in this area and see if it helps connect with you. A lot of times discomfort, self-doubt, lack of confidence is actually stems from an issue with being honest with yourself and with the people you're interacting with. Like the discomfort usually comes with a matter of, okay, if I go into a situation and I know I don't have everything that I need to be successful, and then you try to compensate for that by being dishonest. And that could either be presenting yourself in a way that you want the other person to have more expertise than you have, positioning yourself, justifying or telling yourself. It's that lack of honesty that starts to create this natural discomfort. It has nothing to do with whether you have the expertise or whether you have the capability to be talking to or doing what you're doing at that moment. It's a lack of acknowledgement of what exactly you have and what you're bringing to the conversation that can really cause that misalignment.
How do you suggest like realigning?
So that realignment, there's the two parts, right? There's the honesty with yourself, and then there's the honesty with whoever you're interacting with in a particular time or context. The honesty is really just, if you don't have the skills or experience, conduct the conversation transparently, which is, I'm coming into this with new ideas. I don't have a lot of experience in this. Sometimes just that acknowledgement, as a quick example, is a way to open up a more honest dialogue. So you can level set what the person, should expect out of the conversation. And if you're saying, well, I shouldn't have that conversation with this person, it wouldn't be appropriate, then you got to check yourself before you walk into the conversation. And that's where that honesty starts to really change your process. If you need something that you don't have before you go in and talk to somebody to have an honest conversation, and you don't feel like it would be appropriate, then you have to question whether I should even be having that conversation. Should I be part of that process at that time? It kind of helps regulate you, because it's really moving yourself into positions where you have to feel like you have to be stepping away from the truth. That's going to cause some of this tension that is translating into this self-doubt and some of the other negative feelings I think you're experiencing.
But I'd also take a step even before that in just observing the extent to which you're having this dialogue in your head. Because I think that in most of these scenarios where somebody thinks that they lack something or they're not appropriate to a scenario, it's the amount of it that's based on your framework of expectation or how you might judge someone else is extensive. And especially in a scenario where you don't have someone from the outside telling you, hey, it doesn't sound like you know what you're talking about, or who brought you to the meeting, or whatever all these other fears are that we're afraid people are going to blurt out or suddenly realize and expose us. When you at least observe the extent to which you're thinking about these things and injecting without necessarily even making any changes to it, that helps relieve some of the tension and gives you the platform for that honesty. That's the most integral starting point, as Sam is saying.
Got it. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I'm thinking that a lot of it might be rooted in, kind of to tie back to the beginning, like kind of like a lack of, I don't know, me being uncomfortable with like a lack of experience thing. Like, how did I end up in this like decision maker position?
That goes to like what Sam's saying, and whether or not you should be in a particular situation. You might be very eager and excited to put yourself out there, but you also want to be honest. What's my capability, and be assessing that at all time. But what I keep hearing in how you're describing it, you're very alone in this scenario. Like, it's you with the content providers, or it's you and your company, but you're not thinking of it necessarily as a we problem. So your company has to do X, not just you. It doesn't matter who's doing it. Your company has to do it. And so that's a we problem. It takes some of the pressure off of you, because you could be bouncing ideas off other people. You could be seeing, how should we approach this? What do you think? Even if you're supposed to be the expert in, let's say, one particular discipline, other people can have a certain perception. But even if you're dealing with the nurses, have you ever asked them, how would they go about it? What kind of content do they think should be provided? And unfortunately, a lot of times when we're in our head and we're judging ourselves, we're not open to that. And we're not open to what other people might be thinking, because we're already positing all their thoughts for them. We're saying they're thinking I'm incapable. They're thinking, et cetera. When most of the time people might be coming in and saying, why isn't he involving us? Why does he have to be a know-it-all, or something like that? Like, so that's why I'm so focused on getting out of your head and being in that moment. And as Sam is saying, being very honest with that moment, because our presumptions about how people are judging us are almost always incorrect. And this even goes to, it reminds me of, there was an Office episode, and Jim had a new boss, and his boss said, I need you to do a rundown. And he didn't want to say he didn't know what a rundown was. I don't think they ever actually defined it. And so he goes the whole episode not knowing what a rundown is and not wanting to show that he doesn't know something. And from the audience perspective, of course, it's ridiculous. But all of us could imagine ourselves in that situation because there's an assumption as to what Jim should have known. And we feel that all the time, by somebody asking us to do something, somebody putting us in a position to do something. And then at the same time, we're not doing anything that would be natural or honest, which is what's a rundown, in that scenario, or being open to what all the other people in the scenario might be thinking and how they could be supporting it. So I don't know if that is helpful at all.
Yeah, definitely. I also really like that the Office reference. But I think that's definitely helpful. To me, that just like I need to just slow down, ask more questions, instead of like taking it upon myself to just figure it out, and just
even that process of communicating. Even the process of communicating, I don't know something, invites other people into the conversation. So, but if all you're thinking about is their judgment of you, which they haven't done, you're already kind of upset with them, kind of angry at them, kind of like you've already isolated yourself from everybody else because they're judging you negatively in your mind. So you've created a whole interaction that actually gets in the way of any mindful interaction. So that's why it's so important to be very open. I know that some of the times that in my career, when I was assigned something by someone very senior, they loved when I asked, how would you go about this? But like me always having all the answers kind of made them feel like, well, I have all this expertise. This guy thinks he's some, young buck can do anything. Like that wasn't exactly the best way for me to distinguish myself. A good way to distinguish myself would be to be open to other people's expertise or just being honest about where I stood, because the idea that someone's coming, relatively out of school and is an expert across all dimensions, I don't know who would have that expectation. You'd have the expectation someone's hungry and somebody wants to do a good job, which is a really good starting point for anyone to have an assignment. But the last note I'll say is I would suspect that you don't communicate very, very much in these scenarios, because if you're in your head so much, you're probably not in a position to communicate too much about the scenario. So if the content is taking a long time to be, produced, and other people at, NurseWallet are expecting it, there's a tendency to not even communicate that and explain where things are, because it's probably something you don't want to get too engaged in until you feel confident. So I don't know if that last point made sense.
Yeah, that last point's interesting. About waiting on something until you feel confident. I don't know if I've definitely felt that at some points, but not particularly frequently. But I think that is, that's an interesting point.
But there is a point at which you imagine you'd be more confident in this area, like the other areas that you've done many times.
Yeah.
So there's still a perception in your head that there is a point in the future at which this, I'll be where I want, where I'd feel better about this.
Yeah.
So like that disconnect kind of interferes very often with people being present to right now and being able to communicate where they're at right now, because most people want to communicate from a place of confidence as opposed to a place of doubt.
And communication in this case, tying some concepts together, communication is the number one tool to manage expectations, both your own and the people that you're interacting with around you. And to Jonathan's point, making sure that you're communicating in the present moment about the present moment is always going to be the most effective way to manage expectations and build a good process. To the point where you feel like there's requirements that must be met before something is communicated, it's only going to slow down and hurt your personal process and the process of the company. It's one of those, it can be kind of a counterintuitive notion, but full transparency is always the most efficient. So the more we can communicate, the better. If you are communicating even on a daily basis, I don't know if I'm doing this right. I'm not sure what's going on. I don't feel confident what I'm doing. That message given several times over a month leading up to a product is going to expose more room for collaboration, more room for productive conversations to happen than if you feel that way and then you wait and you wait and you wait until you feel like you have mastered something or you feel you're in a place of your own confidence, because you block other people out of the conversation in that waiting period. Having more communication flow that's more honest and more transparent is always going to lead to better outcomes. It's kind of like a universal process law.
Yeah, that's a good point. That I think that's interesting. Definitely something I need to do more. It's interesting. Like sometimes I'd say I'm fairly pretty communicative, and try like very frequently to pull people in to collaborate. There's just like some random times to pop up that I'm just like definitely feel some resistance.
When you tackle your day, do you find there's any difference between the sequence or the prioritization you give to the things you feel doubt about versus the things that you feel comfortable with doing?
I don't know. I usually prioritize based off of like time sensitivity and how critical something is. But I definitely I could definitely feel myself gravitating away from things that I feel less comfortable doing. Yeah, I think that's what you're getting to.
Yeah. You're anticipating the therapist. That means I need to get ahead. You're too smart a patient. But that is exactly what I'm getting to, because in my experiences, my personal experience is that people tend to sequence the things that, in their comfort zone.
Yeah.
Because the other things are just too big. So you don't even have a road in to working on it. And the reason why I asked that question right after what Sam said is because by being more communicative and more transparent, you release the tension that causes that. And you turn it into something that's exploratory and exciting. But the more that you hold it onto yourself and try and control it and try and appear a certain way, the less likely you are to even get to it, because it's just too big. Anything new is too big. But if you're more open, you're going to find that people are going to help you. People are going to, be more open to collaborating. You're going to get a lot more from the universe. But the more that you try and create some sort of facade because you think that's the way to appear the most professional, I would say the less likely you're going to appear the way you want to appear, and the more likely that it's going to take a very long time to get to a good output.
Yeah.
That
definitely makes sense.
And I'll add some insight on top of that from my experience. And I think especially, you start with you're new to the workforce, or when you're younger, you're going to end up having more of what Jonathan's talking about, these tasks that are learning, these tasks that are on your edges. So the thing that you have to keep in mind is confidence comes from knowing how to do something, like you talked about earlier. Like if you think about something simple, like making a cup of coffee, for instance, you don't have self-doubt when you're doing it because you feel like you know how to do it. Everything, I'll give like a way to help structure this. Everything in life that you feel confident about doing is because you know how to do it. But in reality, you can only do things you know how to do. And I want to pause on that for a second, because when you consider, I'm doing something new and it makes me less confident or have doubt, you're actually doing several things at the same time. And this is what Jonathan's particular. You have to learn things that you do not know to integrate into your knowledge set. And then once you have new things to learn that you've learned, then you can execute the thing because you know you're going into gaps. So in reality, you're not actually ever doing something you don't know how to do. What you're doing is engaging in a learning process, engaging in an integration process, and then engaging in the task once you have the skills to be able to do it. So a lot of people, it becomes very daunting when you have something on your to-do list that's just a blob of, I'm not really sure I have everything to do this, and that's why it becomes difficult. You should always engage in the process of triaging what you've put in front of yourself as a young person to say, here's a task that I've taken on. I know there's going to be a gap, and you know how to learn. and you know how to research. So you need to go and you need to be confident in that I'm going to go learn that stuff and then I'm going to do the thing. And if I'm missing stuff, I'll identify it. I'll go learn the things. I'll do the things. But like you can never do things you don't know how to do. Does that make sense? And that's something you got to really internalize, because everything you actually end up doing, you should be confident doing because you'll know how to do it. If you know you're going in to be missing something, you have to be thinking about it around the lines of, what do I need to learn? How do I engage the things I know how to do to iteratively get to that level of knowledge?
Yeah. I definitely resonate or feel that. And something that I've like made the conscious decision of doing recently is I definitely noticed myself feeling like almost like or avoiding like these bigger, newer tasks. But I realized that a lot of times, like those big new projects, let's say, were actually just a combination of a bunch of small things that I feel very comfortable doing. And the exercise that I've been trying to like force myself to do, or I've been doing, is kind of breaking down things that are big and might seem daunting into smaller tasks that I know that like are more actionable, that I like feel very confident doing. So just breaking up like the one thing into like into like all of its parts, I've felt pretty has made a pretty good difference for me, at least.
It's very exciting that you're raising this at this point in your career, because what happens is you're going to get better and better at more and more things, and you're going to feel more and more confident about things. And it's going to get to a point where that could fill your day, or that the things you know can progress you. And if you don't address the tension of this doubt, or the not being mindful or being curious and excited about new things, you'll get to a point where everything does become repetitive. You play it safe, but that inclination you have to grow, that's not going to change. That inclination will still be there. And then there becomes a huge tension between the dissatisfaction with what you're doing and what you think you should be doing, or actually should be doing, which is growing and learning. And so it's exciting that you're
Yeah, that'd be great.
to how much can we be mindful and get rid of this judgment and expectation, and focus on our process for inculcating new information, and make the growth less painful and more exciting and curious and new. So I'll pause there, because I really think that that's a point that if you could really absorb, it really makes a big difference.
Yeah, I guess my question is how, for both of you, like how should I go about creating that onboarding process for new information?
So the first thing I'll say is, and this is also from my experience and times I've procrastinated, there will be a deadline eventually to you having to deliver on something that you're not feeling confident in. So like eventually the runway of procrastination will run out and you'll need to do something. So the more you can get out of your head, the faster you could take that first step. So beyond like me giving, or Sam giving some framework, for you, you already have a framework, because by hook or by crook, you'll get to a point of addressing whatever it is that you don't know. And you just need to be less afraid of the unknown and more curious to just get started. And when you accelerate that process, you're going to find that there are logical steps that you yourself would think to do. You don't need someone to tell you. You just need to get out of your head a little bit because you would have done it anyway. So I'll pause there again because that's if you could get rid of the time aspect or accelerate time, you'll realize that you do have a process and there is something you would have done. The problem is because if you procrastinate, your options start getting smaller and smaller because the longer it goes on, the less easy it is to go to other people and ask or say, I haven't touched this thing yet, or whatever. So the earlier you can just get rid of the voices and just start whatever your first step might have been, that would be the first step of any framework.
Yeah, I guess I'll add my perspective because it's actually similar. I think starting is the key. And there's two parts of this whole issue. When you take on tasks when you're young, there's a presumption that you're always going to have to learn something as part of the task, like onboarding of that new knowledge. As you get more experience, and I'm speaking because you asked about my personal process, there becomes a greater self-awareness of what I know and what I do not know, and my ability to articulate what I'm willing to learn and engage in a new learning process with, and setting that expectation up front is very important. And like you can start cultivating when you're young, but when you're younger, the expectation is that most tasks that you're given in the professional context are going to involve some new learning context because you're developing your skills. But again, I'm only pointing that out because for me, as you get better at this, it becomes always an exercise of being present with what you know and what you don't know, and what you're willing to learn and what you're not willing to learn. But assuming that you're taking on tasks like we're talking about here, that a learning process is necessary, my process is very similar to Jonathan, what he's suggesting, which is I always start knowing that I have a toolbox that I'm holding already. So I go in and I just start experimenting with the task. And the earlier you can start and identify where you have gaps or roadblocks, that's what I do. So if I'm trying to do something I know I'm going to run into roadblocks, I just start. And as soon as I slam into the first roadblock, I don't let that get me down or give me doubt or lack of confidence. I write it down as a gap. And then it's kind of like, now we can go into the matrix at that point and download Kung Fu, download being a helicopter pilot. Like we have the internet and we have our network and we have all these sources of knowledge. So it's understanding that the learning process is iterative. You can go in, you can test the limitations that you have with your current knowledge and tool set. And as soon as you hit resistance, having an efficient process is not sitting there and lamenting or like putting it away for another month until it runs in the deadline because you feel like I can't do this. It's being proactive about there's a knowledge gap here. What's the most efficient way to close that knowledge gap? Where do I get that skill? Where do I get that experience? And then go back to the task and iterate again. And then you hack it again until you hit the next gap. And then the process repeats. That's how I do it. And I will say that by looking at it that way, by breaking down tasks into learning tasks and execution tasks and iterating quickly, you can really start to have that you start to combat that resistance that we're talking about. And that resistance comes from doubt, that resistance about, I don't want to do this. I don't feel like properly equipped. I've set expectations for myself or others that are beyond my current capability. And that causes that malaise and that discomfort. So it's really kind of iterating through that process and being communicative is my advisement and what I've been practicing myself. So it's not really that different.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So just to quickly summarize, it'd be like, well, first I would take like the exercise of identifying like what it is that's in my toolbox, toolbox of skills, also identifying things that I want to learn and areas of interest. And then when being posed with a problem or posed with a challenge or a task, attacking it first with what is my existing skill set and doing this quickly identifying what the roadblocks are and pulling in others on the team or the internet to help address that roadblock.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary, and it's a very process-oriented way you described it. And the way even you were articulating it, it goes to show that one piece in the beginning, which is knowing your skill set and monitoring what you're able to take on, is super critical for your comfort level and your confidence level. Because, for example, if you are starting, you said as a marketing professional, and then somebody says, hey, can you take on this task in finance? There's a large gap between what you know and what you don't know, which is going to make the task a lot more complicated and difficult. So if you think about it that way, the closer you get to accepting tasks with the skills that you have to execute them, then it becomes easier because then you can just say, yes, I'll do it. And then you can do it. So then there's everything between having everything you need to do something you take on and having nothing you need to do something you take on. That's a huge continuum. So like learning your lines of your tolerance, for instance, you could say, as I've gotten older in my career, I don't usually like to take on tasks that are more than like a 10% gap in the skills that I have and the things that the things that I'm asked to do, because that means it's going to disrupt my day and I have to do a lot more learning than my process is geared toward right now. But in the beginning, it might be different. But like that mechanic right there that you articulated in the beginning is such a critical part to be conscious of, because you, like you said, you always want to be in a learning orientation, pushing yourself. But the difference between pushing yourself could be I have missing 10% of the knowledge and skills that I need versus I'm missing 90% of the skills and knowledge I need. And that's part of that honesty, because if you're taking things that are more the latter, you're setting yourself up to fail. And that's going to cause a lot of that lack of confidence. So you got to kind of find your lines, like what's the gap and how much am I always willing to take on that's going to induce a learning process versus an execution.
And you also want to tether it all to what's your scope. Like, because the Venn diagram of the expectation of what you think you should be or you should know, or whatever arbitrary reason, and a lot of time it is arbitrary, that you think in one area you're confident, in another area you're not, or whatever distinctions you're making often are more arbitrary than you think. And to the extent you're making a distinction that is beyond just what the task is that you're supposed to be doing, you leave yourself open to other people deciding whether you should have certain expertise or not. So the concept of knowing very honestly what you are capable of, really honestly, not what you should be, not what face you should put out there, but what you're capable of, and what your actual scope is, not your expectation of yourself, not your concerns about what you don't know, but what your actual role in whatever activity is, it is. And if you can couple those two tightly with honesty about what you are doing, what you're capable of doing, and clarity on what your actual scope is, not the voices in your head, then that frees you up to be able to start becoming an expert in multiple areas. But the more that you're fighting shadows, like of what you expect you should know, what you think other people think you should know, and the less you're clear about what your actual role is, the more you're going to just always be in this never-ending cycle in your head.
Got it. That's really helpful. I'm writing down notes on the side. Yeah, that's helpful. That's really helpful.
I'll before you reflect, I'll finish with a more kind of like maybe comical anecdote, but that this has come back to the confidence of the self-doubt. Even me in my career now, I would consider myself, I know what I know, and there's a lot of things that I don't know, but I'm always confident. And the reason is, for example, if somebody said, hey, can you build this financial strategy? And I'm not a finance person. I could say, yes, I can do it very confidently. But in that moment, I'll say, I'm going to need to go back and maybe study and get my CPA. It may take me several months to years to like get the right skills to do what you're doing. But I can tackle it if that's what you want. And obviously that's a ridiculous scenario, but it's that level of self-assuredness of what I do not know and how I communicate in that moment when I do not know, and setting an honest expectation about what will need to happen for me personally to be able to tackle something in a moment that gives me peace and gives me confidence. Because then you give the other people in your sphere an ability to react to what will be a realistic impression of what will need to be done for me personally to be able to accomplish something. And if you kind of apply that extreme example to everything in between, and you know the gap and you can speak to it well, it actually experience has nothing to do with confidence in that regard. So hopefully that helps kind of tie things together a bit.
Yeah, that quick anecdote sounds like the process that you summarized earlier for taking on new ideas, where it was like understand your toolbox, identify the roadblocks. Seems like you're doing that almost instantaneously upon hearing something.
Yes. And that's what happens when you practice a process. So like my confidence as a professional, as I got older, and I like the way you're framing it, is that I've just practiced my process of self-awareness, of identifying my gaps and communicating them in the moment to other people before I put myself in a situation where I'm going to feel lack of confidence or self-doubt. because I'm putting out something. I let things happen accidentally, or I put myself in a bad position where I've tied somebody to think I'm going to do something that I cannot do in a timeline that cannot be done. And that's where the lack of confidence comes. So you're exactly right. It's really, my confidence comes from just being good at the process you just described and really nothing else. And that's why, if you think as a young person, if you can master one process and be confident for the rest of your life, regardless of what you know, it's kind of an attractive proposition, I would think.
Yeah. I really like that. It's definitely something that I'm going to use immediately.
It's also, Sam's able to do that because he's also unencumbered by all of the weight of the thoughts of, oh, I don't know something, I'll be exposed, I might fail, etc. He's going straight to, okay, this is like an issue. Like, do I want to? Can I do X? That's it. There's no additional thinking. I found, now I go back in time, I found that because ultimately, imposter syndrome or whatever, the doubt comes from a place of fear of failure and all the anger and acrimony that will be coming our way for not being what we should have been, what we think we should have been. That's a process to get past all that. And I used to tell myself, anytime I had something new, I would say, oh my gosh, this is going to go so much better than I could ever have imagined. And I would always say that anytime I felt like, suddenly I got myself into a scenario, even maybe it's a week in or 2 weeks in past the point that I got myself into that scenario, I would start just giving myself some affirmations, only because you need something to counteract all that negativity that you're building up, with this doubt, as opposed to just getting straight to whatever you would do if you were just being mindful and present and open to the moment. Because when you're excited, it creates that curiosity, and the curiosity is what is necessary. Childlike curiosity is the only way we learn.
Yeah.
But otherwise, we're afraid to learn. We're afraid to try. And then you get in that whole scenario of I'd sooner not even try something new. So,
yeah, if the continuum we were describing is you never want more than a 0% gap between what you're asked to do or what you take on and what you already know, then you're going to have very easy tasks and execution for the rest of your life, but you'll learn nothing.
Yeah.
It's just toggling that tolerance as you get older, as you mature in your career, and as you acquire expertise in human capital that determines how much you're going to be learning versus how much you're going to be relied on for executing what you already know. And that's, I'm breaking it down very mechanically, but I think it's a convenient way to think about the process.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I've started, that is becoming very clear. And I really like the childlike curiosity aspect you brought up, Jonathan. That's something that I think is incredibly important. And I like something that at least it's important to me, like keeping that curiosity and interest in new things, and also trying to maintain that with the things that I do regularly.
So how are you feeling overall, Eric, as we get close to the end of our session here? Are you feeling better? Are you feeling more confused? Where are you at?
Yeah, this is good. I feel pretty good. I feel like we kind of dug into all, like, the question that I posed and what I was experiencing. And I have some actual tools to help navigate it.
Great. Do you have any other last minute burning questions or comments?
I don't think so.
Well, thanks for coming on the show, Eric. We really enjoyed having you.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Yep. And for everyone listening, thanks for tuning in. If you or anyone you know would like to come on Business Therapy, please drop us a line on any of the channels are available. And otherwise, have a great weekend, and we will talk to you next week.